Samus Aran returns again on a brand new mission. It's Metroid Dread. The only thing dreadful here is that the games don't come out often enough. From the team that brought you Metroid Samus Returns, a great remake of the Game Boy original for the 3DS, and the same team that developed the Castlevania Lords of Shadow trilogy. You might think, who cares? I hated Lords of Shadow 2, and AM2R was better than Samus Returns. The last one is somewhat debatable, but you know what? Regardless of what you may think of their past work, Metroid Dread is a welcome addition to the series. Not long after Metroid Fusion, Dread takes place in the planet CDR, where a transmission caught by the Galactic Federation showed there was at least one surviving X, the dangerous parasitic organism that was the focus of Fusion's plot. They send a few EMMI research robots designed by the Federation itself to investigate. Communication is quickly lost, and since Samus is immune to the X parasites, she's the only one who can go there and investigate it herself. Not long after she lands, she encounters a mysterious armored Chozo who easily outclasses her in combat. It looks as if she's about to meet her end, but something wakes up inside her, making her black out. She somehow wakes up fully intact, but with many of her abilities lost, like usual. And that's all I can say without spoiling. The story starts off a bit slow, but gets really interesting over time, even if the game isn't loaded with cutscenes. There is a lot of exposition done from Adam, the computer that guides you to your objectives, but the game does get a lot more cinematic than any 2D Metroid ever was. There are probably a dozen cutscenes or less, and I think that was just the right amount. My only complaints are that they still seem reluctant to have Samus talk, and I think voicing Adam was a bit unnecessary. Maybe it's just me, I just prefer to read the kinds of things he says, like the logbooks from Metroid Prime, than to hear that robotic voice talking to me while Samus just stands still looking at it. There is a new antagonist worse than this, and since series producer Sakamoto said so himself, I will paraphrase it. This marks the end of the decades-long saga of the series. That doesn't mean it's the end of the Metroid series. So what does it mean? Well, once you beat the game, you know exactly what that means, and that makes me very excited for the future of the franchise. This is the 5th installment of the main Metroid series, which means there is plenty of exploration action to be done. No, I don't consider this a Metroidvania game because it's just Metroid and no Castlevania. For those unfamiliar with this type of game, they are known for being 2D games that mix platforming, exploration and basic shooting. The main draw of the Metroid games and its clones is the progression structure. You're expected to try and explore as much as you can with the large areas, which makes you realize there are all these places you can't reach, can't cross, or there are items you have no way of collecting. That's because once you find the areas you can go into, you eventually find some kind of upgrade that gives you new abilities, allowing you to explore areas you couldn't explore before. It might sound like a boring scavenge hunt, but it's not. These types of games usually have the level design more or less hinting or indirectly pointing you to where you should be going, and once you get a specific upgrade, how you can use it to go to places you couldn't reach or cross before is intuitive enough. Metroid Dread is no different in that regard. In fact, veterans of the series might find it a lot more linear compared to Super Metroid, Zero Mission or Metroid 1, in the sense that the map design often discourages backtracking for optional power-ups until you have most of the abilities unlocked. This might sound like a bad thing, but I think it's good. It prevents you from getting lost easily and keeps the pace balanced. If you always focus on going straight for what looks like it's where the game's telling you to go next, you're a lot more likely to have a good time. If you intentionally deviate and backtrack for expansions or energy cells you remember missing, you might end up losing track of the critical path. In fact, that's the big flaw with the level design in Dread. As long as you save optional pickups for after you're about to say 80% done with the story, you won't have a problem. The moment you sidetrack, it gets really difficult to tell where you should be going, because the layout of the map as a whole has way too many barriers locked behind very late abilities. I made the mistake of trying to pick some power-ups as early as possible in my first playthrough. It made me run in circles for almost 2 hours before I found my way back to the main path again. I learned my lesson and focused on just unlocking more abilities until I had the screw attack. I've seen some people complain that the visuals of each area lack variety, making it easier to get confused. I can sort of see that when exploring Kataris, the lava area. Even then, I have a hard time thinking of any set of rooms or shafts that look that similar to each other. Unless we're talking about the EMMI sections. Oh yes, the ever so polarizing EMMI sections. Remember when I mentioned the Federation sent these research robots to investigate the planet before Samus? Well, as it turns out, the reason they lost communication with these autonomous robots was because they were somehow reprogrammed and now watch over specific sectors of each area of the planet in search of Samus specifically. By search, I mean they can detect her by sound, chase aggressively, and murder her. Their armor plating is made of the strongest metal the Federation could find, which means your beams, missiles, and bombs don't work against them. Your chance to eliminate an MMI is locked behind the main path of the game, and until you get that chance, every time you enter an MMI section, you're basically required to pass through without being caught. These areas really do suffer from confusing design, and I'm not gonna lie, many portions even between MMI sections from different areas of the planet can end up looking the same. I think it's the code color palette that they share that exacerbates the problem. I'm not a big fan of them, but you know what, I don't hate them either. I noticed there are far more people who do than I imagined, and sometimes that's due to the misconceptions about this addition to the game. You see, these sections are definitely a stark contrast to the rest of the gameplay. Everywhere else you explore as long as you want, blast every enemy you see, and you only have so many passages from one place to another. EMMI sections, however, require you to stay away from the reach of an unkillable enemy that instantly murders you, has multiple visible paths that may or may not be helpful to your escape. Sounds like a pain. Sounds like something you don't want in your Metroid. Slow stealth sections? Not allowed to freely explore in Metroid? What blasphemy is this? Boo! Boo! Metroid team sucks! That is a grave misconception. Yes, it's true, you can't freely explore the section until you destroy the robot. But to describe these as low stealth sections is just plain wrong. It's unfortunate that is the first impression most players have. After all, even though stealth gameplay isn't new to Metroid, the way it's implemented here is very foreign to the franchise. Going slow and focusing on hiding is merely one way to approach this. Once you notice the layout is not that complicated and was in fact designed so that you can rush ahead of the murderous robot and only need to hide when you need to clear up the way to a nearby exit, there is very little slowdown. Later, MMI have additional abilities to add more difficulty, but the idea is the same. You might end up taking slow the first few encounters, but trying to focus exclusively on not being detected at all tends to result in you wasting too much time for no reason. Really, the key is getting used to the layouts and planning your routes whenever you have to backtrack through the sections. You will find that they become significantly better if you do that. I admit it took me a while to figure this out. I'm telling you so you don't take as long. I've always been a slow learner. Don't judge. I'll throw another bomb to the complaints about getting lost in the game. Dread has quite a few of these morph ball tunnels or tubes that send you in a one-way track to another room. which forces you to take a longer way around if you have any reason to go back to the room you came from. This can be annoying, but again, once you make it far enough to have the screw attack, problems like these become a non-issue since you can pretty much go anywhere. Having addressed these common complaints, I still stand by that MMI sections aside, the level design is fine. In fact, I got lost way more often playing Super Metroid compared to Dread. Just take my advice and save deviations from the main path for way later. Now, about some other gameplay additions. If you played Samus Returns on 3DS, some of these features will be familiar. Samus can aim freely in all directions if you hold the L button. This means despite being stuck to 2 dimensions, you don't get to walk around using the D-pad, which has other functions in this game. But the free aiming is really useful. Even if you're not a big fan of this, you shouldn't worry about having to take enemies down with this too often, because also returning from Samus Returns is the counter mechanic. Or is it parry? Who cares? Samus can counter enemy attacks that are telegraphed by a consistent visual cue, causing the enemy to become more vulnerable, and if you immediately shoot after this, the damage is massive. You can ignore this feature for regular enemies if you want, but for boss fights, it's really important to get used to this. Reality is, some people will like this, others might not like it. Personally, I like it, because it adds a little more than just aiming and shooting to Metroid combat without dragging the pace down. Completely new to Dread is the ability to do a melee attack while dashing, that while looking similar to the counter animation doesn't have the same effect. Its damage isn't great, but it does become more effective with each power suit upgrade. More than enough to swat pesky things that get in your way when backtracking. The AO gauge is also back from Returns, and it's used for other abilities such as lightspeed dashes that work both for evading attacks and moving certain distance super quickly, and a chameleon style cloaking ability that makes you invisible. The ability to temporarily display hidden objects in your screen is back as well, but it's not unlocked until really late in the game. Sound and music is about as good as you can expect from modern Metroid. Not that there was anything wrong with non-modern Metroid sound design. As always, the soundtrack is very ambient, getting cinematic for boss fights as it should, since the dynamic changes to be full-on action when you're stuck in a room fighting to survive. The thing that really shocked me was finding out the composer was Sayako Doi. She composed for Mario Maker 2 and Animal Crossing New Horizons. This is her first time working on Metroid, and it doesn't sound like it is. I have zero complaints about the soundtrack, it all fits perfectly with the areas and situations, and more importantly, doesn't sound out of place for the series. Until the credits roll, I could have sworn Kenji Yamamoto was working with the team, but no, his last work with Metroid was Samus Returns. Maybe he's busy with Prime 4, who knows. Samus controls as good as she possibly could feel in a 2D Metroid. She's nimble, responsive, and powerful as heck with expanded moves, all without making the game easy. Cause trust me, maybe if you've beaten the other 2 Metroid games several times you might not feel it, but this game is freaking hard sometimes. Especially the bosses. It really pushes you to react fast, and I don't mean that just because of the parry mechanic. If you don't play on easy mode, getting hit by enemies takes a large chunk of your energy, although some of it gets mitigated with each suit upgrade you get. One complaint I have with the controls is really one I have with 2D Metroid in general. I think they use way too many buttons to my comfort. I kept mistaking some of the R and L combinations and taking free hits or wasting missiles because of that. This would also be the part of the review I'd express my deep hatred for Shine Spark challenges. But you know what? I don't hate them here. Some took me a very long time to get done right, and I didn't complete the game 100%, But I think because absolutely none of the stiffness of the past games is here, pulling Shine Spark challenges properly was a lot more manageable than usual. And last but not least, the map option has quite a few added layers of complexity or usefulness depending on how you look at it. On first glance, it can look quite intimidatingly strange, but you can't really zoom in or out if the icons are too tangled together. I highly recommend doing that because once you can discern the icons, the map gets 10 times more useful than you might think. Not only are all types of doors labeled with the type and whether you can pass through them or not, upgrades you might have seen but weren't able to pick up will be displaying the map to make tracking them later easy, and areas with hidden upgrades to locate will be flashing. You can also locate elevators, trains and teleporters in the map, of course. I found the teleporters to be a real pain to use until near the end of the game, but hey, they exist. I get not every fan will approve the static or the presence of QuickTime events or the way the map design punishes players for taking optional detours, but overall, this is an outstanding entry in the series and a solid addition to the genre in modern times through and through. 2D Metroid is back, and I don't know about you, but I feel my confidence in the series' future is renewed after experiencing Dread to its conclusion. If all of this sounds like fun times, my answer is yes. This is very much worth the full price. Only thing to take note is if you personally think a single playthrough lasting less than 20 hours or less than 10, depending on how proficient you are with Metroid, is too short. It's been pointed out to me the fun of repeating playthroughs is your familiarity with the map, making it possible to ignore the intended critical path to pull some surprisingly effective sequence breaks. Yeah, despite how seemingly linear the game is, people have been succeeding in changing the order of progression less than a month after the game's release. If you enjoy experimenting with that kind of thing, I say the short length, which is typical of our Metroid, shouldn't be an issue. Also, it's Metroid. You know it will be difficult to find with a significant discount, so my arguments are irrelevant. Anyway, I hope you liked my review of Metroid Dread. Feel free to subscribe for more reviews, which I do every time I finish a game from my backlog, or leave your thoughts in the comments. For now, have a nice day or a good evening.